This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by the San Diego County Bar Association. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors to provide funding for the investigative journalism you expect from Voice of San Diego. The election of qualified judges is essential to our justice system. When you vote on March 3rd, you'll be able to choose from 11 candidates for judge running in 4 judicial races. For more than 40 years, the San Diego County Bar Association has provided evaluations of candidates running in contested judicial elections to help inform your decision. To view the evaluations for 2020, visit judgechoices.com. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor, contact Julianne Marco at julianne@vosd.org.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice of San Diego. I'm joined, as always, by Assistant Editor Andrew Keatts. Hello.
What's up, buddy?
How are you?
Good.
Managing Editor Sara Libby.
Hello.
Hello. We have done it. We shipped the 3rd edition of A Parent's Guide to Public Schools. It's done. It happened. Very proud of that. We'll talk about that briefly. And it's go time for Measure C. That's the initiative to raise the hotel room tax, fund an expansion of the convention center, blah, blah, blah. But one person is mucking things up. We're going to talk about that and why and some of the discussion around the funding for the homelessness part. And Poway Unified School District is back in the bond market. We'll talk to reporter Ashley McGlone about why that is a big deal. But first, Voice of San Diego launched 15 years ago Sunday. I remember that well. I was actually nowhere near here or part of Voice.
And yet you remember it well.
In any way. I do. I remember because...
I remember it too.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was a college journalist in Los Angeles and thought, hey, good. There are journalism things happening.
Yeah. So Andrew Donahue produced a story for the first edition. It came out, it looked nice. It was about the sort of history to that point of the city of San Diego's financial troubles and the scandal that kind of enveloped it. He had some new revelations in that, and it was quite a thing. We were all excited to see if it would get any legs, and I was watching it from South Carolina at the time. I didn't start actually freelancing for Voice until May of 2005, so not quite 15 years ago, and then I came on as a full-time employee in October of 2005. So been quite a run. There's a lot of interesting moments. We were reflecting on a couple of them. There's
internal moments.
Yeah. There's obviously the big ones when we broke a big story about embezzlement at the Southeastern Economic Development Corporation, and right after that, the FBI seized all their computers, and the mayor put out a big memo saying if what Voice reported is true, like we're going to have to do a lot of things. And that was a moment. Of course, the New York Times did a story about us. And then there was the time that Liam Dillon,
walked into the glass door.
It was violent.
Was that the one you were talking about?
Stole my thunder a little bit. So
okay. I thought you were going to maybe talk about one of his journalistic accomplishments.
Yeah, there were those.
No, yeah, we're all gathered in the boardroom waiting for him to come make a presentation, and he came around super confident, smashed right into the window. Perhaps the most violent thing I've ever seen.
Yes, it's in
live.
my top 5 Voice of San Diego moments.
Yes. So, 15 years. I'm very proud of it. We've changed a lot. We've evolved and adjusted, and I think we're as powerful and influential as I could have hoped we would be 15 years from now. I have a lot less hair. That seems to be a problem. Well, that's fine. Whatever.
It's fine.
I'm married. It's all set. All right.
We'll be dead soon.
The Aspen Institute did a report for the California Healthcare Foundation and some of the grants it made and the role of journalism in public health issues. And we were mentioned in there as a case study about, many, many times. And there was one of the interviews that they did that we took particular notice of. It said that the interviewee echoed a lot of sentiments about how important we had been to the hepatitis A reporting and the crisis around it and the mobilization that occurred after our reporting in, what was that, 2016?
No.
2017.
2017. And, how that really spurred change around here. And the interviewee said this. She likened Voice of San Diego to a little chihuahua nipping at your heels all the time at the politicians. I like the chihuahua.
I feel like it's meant to be kind of a dig, but it's also amazing.
I think it's meant to just really highlight how annoying we can be to people who need to be annoyed.
Yeah.
So I think chihuahuas are, I've always wanted a chihuahua, a little cute one that was named Bear. Just name it the biggest thing possible. Or Mammoth.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Because it's
I
not
do get
big. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I think we're bigger than the smallest possible dog.
That's true.
Yeah, or the largest possible rodent. I didn't
there you go.
Than both of those things.
I once heard a story that there were feral chihuahuas running around a street in City Heights, Orange Avenue, and chasing bicyclists, particularly.
Wow.
And I went and chased it for a day. I went to go look for these.
You chased the story about the chihuahuas chasing bikes.
Yeah.
Wow.
It would be a nice slice of life. But it couldn't find them to interview them.
I'm really sad you didn't find that.
What did your reporting process look like? What were you doing?
I got a tip that
just got a pork chop and put it on your
no,
your belt.
I got a tip that on Orange Avenue in City Heights, it was everybody talked about it and it was a menace. So I went up to a bunch of people and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I thought,
I hope whoever told you that was just around a corner, just oh my God, look at this idiot. This is so funny.
Well, they never revealed themselves. All right. Well, we did just release our 3rd edition of A Parent's Guide to Public Schools. We got new data this year in it. Includes teacher experience at each school and some explainers on some takes from experts about what you should think about when you look for a school. A lot of diverse takes on that. Explainers of what a charter school is, what transitional kindergarten is, what a magnet school is. But then we added all that new data to the tables. It kind of looks like consumer reports, and I'm proud of this one. This one looks good. Will Huntsberry helped manage the project. Julianne Marco, Sara, of course, had a role. Me, but I also wanted to shout out to UC San Diego Center for Research and Evaluation, and Laura Cohn at the Center for Local Income Mobility at the Workforce Partnership, and Gladys Selfridge, and Georgia Kovacs at the UC San Diego Extension. All of them helped really make this possible for us. So,
I follow the California legislature very closely.
Yeah.
And a few years ago when they switched to this new system for grading schools, the schools dashboard,
yeah.
most of the criticism focused on the fact that they made it virtually impossible to compare schools. You
Yeah.
can look up an individual school, but there's essentially no way to compare across schools if you're shopping for a school.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice that there is a way to actually do that.
Yeah, they have this incredibly complex color code system for each school of what each color means. We translated that into these, they're called Harvey balls. That's what Consumer Reports uses. And then arrows that we did on that. And that's just the test scores for English and math. We also have in there, like I said, teacher experience for the first time, average teacher experience. And so you look at some of these schools, you'll see high teacher experience, very low chronic absenteeism, high graduation rates, good scores. That's obviously a more positive environment. And you look at one literally right next to it in the list, like Lincoln High versus La Jolla High or something, and it's just the opposite. And it's so it's one part, consumer report, but also it's hard to look away from some of these inequities. It's really striking. So check that out. We have them at most public libraries in the city of San Diego. We're distributing them also to preschools, and we have a lot of partners like the Barrio Logan College Institute and others that are handing them out. And so we will be announcing over time different meetings where we're going to go talk and walk people through them. So if you're interested in that, please come by and we'll try to answer your questions. And if we don't have the answer, we'll write them down and we'll, of course, email you after that with the answer. We never forget to do that. But it's something I'm really proud of, and yet another product. So we have San Diego 101, the Parent's Guide to Public Schools. We have the various San Diego Explains. All that is part of this sort of academy effort we have to help people understand their community, and it's a big passion of mine. So on our 15th year anniversary, I think that's a nice little coda for it. So
Pretty dope.
all right, Measure C. We have been closely following the travails of Measure C even before it was known as Measure C. That's the initiative the mayor, labor unions, hotel owners want to pass to raise the hotel room tax and fund an expansion of the convention center, homeless services, and roads. Last week, we reported that one man, Michael McConnell, he runs the homeless news feed and homelessness SD, I think it is. He's, owned La Jolla Coin Shop. He sold his coin shop and has very expressly used the revenue he got, the money he got from that, to spend on politics. And he has spent more than $236,000 on mailers and ads against Measure C. And we asked him why, and he said a few things. You can check it out in the politics report. But one of the things he said was just advocacy for a better city. He's just basically saying, like, any of this money is misspent. All this money is misspent on homelessness, and we should have something better. A lot of people on the other side saying, like, you're literally hurting people that you think you want us to help more. So it's kind of a fascinating debate. With 2/3 requirement for this measure to pass, you can't have much opposition, let alone $236,000 or more against it.
We should also add here that he has not at any point in the last few years made his opposition to this measure a secret.
No.
Nor his intent to spend money opposing the measure. He had explicitly promised to do so long before it ever qualified for the ballot. I recall talking to him at a city council debate in 2018 where he was spending money on Monica Montgomery's city council campaign. And he told me at that time, I believe, again, he was very explicit, very out front about this. He was spending on Monica because he supported Monica and wanted her to win, but also it was sort of a test run for him. For right now, he was learning how to deploy resources in a campaign environment because he's not a campaign professional. He had never done it before. So that was sort of his training wheels on how to affect electoral outcomes. So to the extent that he's pissed off a lot of people who support Measure C, they can't say that this took them by surprise. They could not have been blindsided by this. He had promised to do it.
Yeah. And we've seen this before. We saw, Doug Manchester has put money in, but these are people usually with like direct interests in the race or in the outcome or something. And obviously he has interest as a citizen in all these things, but it's certainly just an interesting decision. Every time I asked him, like, why put so much personal wealth in there, he would always go back to why Measure C was bad, as though the connection to why you would want to pay to kill it was pretty obvious. And it's just an interesting moment, really, I think, for local politics. The last time I saw somebody do something like this was in 2004. Do you ever remember Mel Shapiro?
Of course.
Mel Shapiro, Brooklyn accent. His name is on all of these. He was a
court
cases.
Classic city council gadfly.
Yeah.
He sued the city often. He was a public commenter.
Public open
government advocate. Yeah.
He spent, I remember he hated the strong mayor form of government proposals so badly. In 2004, when it was going up to ballot, he spent like $20,000 of his own money against it. Of course, it passed. So that's like the last sort of parallel I can think. Like somebody you didn't realize like would even have that much money, to drop in. So that's kind of fascinating. But at the heart of it, we did some reporting this week about what McConnell's concerns were about the homeless funding within there. And there were kind of two big questions that Lisa Halverstadt identified that were the problem with, or that were not really the problem, but the source of concern, right? What were those two questions?
So one is whether it's going to generate enough money. And I think this is sort of gets to the heart of McConnell's argument. And I think he would argue that the homelessness aspect of it has sort of been co-opted by the Measure C proponents now that that's like a popular thing that people want to spend money to fix. And so, his argument is that the money should go towards homelessness. And as Lisa pointed out, 59% of the funds go to the convention center expansion, and after 5 years, a portion of it goes towards road repairs as well. So that's one piece of it, is that this isn't enough money being directed towards homelessness, and that we should be doing something where all of our efforts are going towards homelessness services. And then the other piece of it is the fact that there is no directive for how the money's going to be spent. And so the proponents, I think, will argue that that's a feature and not a bug, that you don't want to tie the hands of future, city leaders to say you have to spend it on these prescribed solutions when maybe those solutions won't be right for us in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means that it's really hard to hold any of it accountable. And I think that that's an issue for McConnell also.
Yeah.
And so in your talking with him, he sort of added a third thing, which is that although they are not in direct competition, the passage of Measure C, which does not necessarily produce any new homes for people who are currently living on the streets, may weaken the electoral prospects of a housing bond in November. And he cited Barbara Breeze basically laying out that exact rationale for where she stands on those two measures as another reason that he doesn't think that this is a good idea.
Yeah, he's obviously very supportive of the effort to raise property taxes in November to fund affordable housing construction. And I don't think he's actually said, I support that, I really want that to pass, but it's clear like that's the kind of thing he prefers. And yeah, that this is kind of, what is it when you eat your same species?
Say that again.
Cannibalism?
Cannibalism, yeah. Like it cannibalizes the, the effort. Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to the fact that there are no directives for how the money should be spent, because he said, there's no guarantee this will produce even a single unit of housing. And even, in fact, if all the money went toward housing, it would still produce a very small amount of housing.
Yeah.
But he's arguing maybe none of it will.
Yeah, so I managed a mayoral debate the other night, and I asked. So Lisa actually set up Lisa Halverstadt set up a good question for me. She says, in that plan in Measure C, it says in 5 years the mayor has to come up with a plan for how that money in homelessness is going to be spent. And I asked them like, what would they prioritize in that? And almost all of them said permanent supportive housing in it. Even Barbara Bree. And so they were all thinking that this is going to have specific, it could be packaged to actually build affordable housing. But I think there's a lot of other concern that the state and others have spent so much money to help homelessness in San Diego that money could dry up someday. And this funding source would be key to backfilling that, which is on the one hand probably important, but on the other hand, kind of an indictment of the situation now, as though this won't be new. This could be used very well to just keep going, just to supplant what we're doing right now. So it's a really fascinating moment for that measure. Tony Kravaric, the chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego, and the Republican Party itself have made clear that they also oppose Measure C. But there was a weird thing that came up this week. Republican campaign mailer will include this message from San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer. It says, I ask that you please join me in supporting policy initiatives that reduce homelessness, fix our streets, and support the strengthening of our economy, including our convention and tourism industries. So,
which policy does that?
Yeah, it turns out that little message was literally paid for by the San Diego Tourism Authority. Now, the Tourism Authority is the former Convention and Visitors Bureau. Conviz, and it gets most of its money from a hotel tax that the hotels put themselves on the bills of their clients.
Yeah, it's not a tax; that's a self-assessment.
It's clearly a self-assessment, and so they get all
and
that
when they list it as a tax on their own receipts.
Yeah,
ignore that.
That's not really what's happening.
Ignore that. It's still a self-assessment.
Self-assessment is administered by the city. So we were wondering, like, why would they, how would they do that? They said, look, this is the other funds we get from actual dues that hotels pay separately. They gave $5,000 to the Republican Party. Excuse me. The Tourism Authority CEO, Joe Terzi, told me, he said that the message was meant to tell Republicans about how important Measure C is, but again, they literally
They want you to know it's important so that you'll vote against it.
they want you to know it's important, but not
They can't-
enough to actually say it. The Republican Party was clearly they're opposed to it, so they're willing to, for $5,000, put a thing in their mailer that's supposedly for it, but they can't actually use the words. I wish I was part of the email exchange of how the text was negotiated, because that's just classic modern politics.
I like the strengthening our economy, including our convention and tourism industries, which I'm certain that was part of the massaged email back and forth there.
Yeah.
At one point, that just said, and support strengthening our convention and tourism.
So this is a $5,000 bet that people will A, know that what they're talking about is Measure C, B, know that Measure C relates to conventions and tourism, and then C, realize that this is a pro argument for that, and that they should, even though the Republican Party opposes this, they should take the message from the mayor and support it. That's a interesting way to do things. All right, we've got a lot more coming up. Please stay tuned, and we've got Ashley McGlone coming on to talk about Poway's reemergence in the bond market and much more.
Hey y'all, Will Huntsberry here. I'm the education reporter for Voice of San Diego, and we just released the 2020 edition of our Parents' Guide to Public Schools. We're hosting community meetings to explain how to use the guide and answer your questions. Join us on Tuesday, February 11th at 6 p.m. at the Rancho Bernardo Library to talk about the guide. We'll answer your questions about magnet schools and charter schools. We'll talk about test scores and school safety, after school care, and everything you need to know to navigate school choice. See you there.
Well, I mentioned this is Voice of San Diego's 15th birthday, 15th anniversary of its launch, February 9th, 2005. And one of the biggest stories we did over that period was an investigation into how Poway Unified School District was able to borrow $105 million and then arrange to pay it back in a way that would cost taxpayers $1 billion over the life of this payback system. Our investigation of that whole thing and the series that came out of it turned into major changes in Poway's Poway Unified School District's leadership, in the way that it does bonds, and in state law. So there was a new law that was passed that said districts can't be doing stuff like this. Now the district is back in the market to borrow again. And joining us in studio or on the line is Ashley McGlone. Ashley, hello.
Hi, Scott.
Thank you for taking the time. So when we look back at what happened, what was the name of that sort of bond that when you borrow a little bit out and you have to pay it back over time, you actually, I think the rule is like, the reason it gets so big is because they don't pay anything back for like a lot of years, right?
Right. So what it was called was a capital appreciation bond. And the way that they structured it, it's a 40-year repayment timeline, but they put off making any payments for the first 20 years and essentially deal with repayments and interest on a balloon payment basis for the final 20 years. And that just inflates the debt in a dramatic way. In this case, as we saw in Poway, and other districts did this too. But yeah, they haven't even made the first payment on that particular debt and won't until 2031, and then we'll continue paying it through 2051.
That's just say that again. So in 2011, they borrowed basically $100 million, a little more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And they will not start making payments on it until 2031.
Yes. Correct. And we'll continue paying that debt through 2051, again, on an inflated basis through what was then known as the 40-year capital appreciation bond structure. New rules, don't allow such high repayments, part of the reforms that were sparked, following attention on these types of deals that were being made by school districts like Poway and others. But yeah, so it definitely it was a different world back then, and so that debt hasn't even come due, but it's still on Poway's books as we speak.
So if you graduated from Poway Unified School District in 2011, you'd be like almost 40 before they even started paying back the loan they took out then. That's fascinating.
Right. And they did so in part because they told taxpayers at the time when they approved that bond measure in 2008, hey, we want to keep your taxes low. We want to, not raise taxes. We're just going to push it out. And so voters didn't totally understand what they meant by that, I don't think. And again, even some of the, officials, it wasn't really clear when they did that specific deal. And just to be clear too, bond measures, especially back then, voters aren't told, hey, this bond measure, we're seeking X millions of dollars in taxes for this many millions of dollars in school construction projects, but it's going to ultimately cost us, this exponential amount to repay with interest over decades. Often voters never saw what that estimated total debt cost was. They just see that principal amount that the school is going to get and collect to pay for the projects. Now in 2014, a transparency law was put on the books that says, okay, school districts, you need to tell the voters, at least estimate your best guess of what you think that debt is going to cost, knowing that, they're going to issue these bonds over time and issue this debt over time, and it might fluctuate with different interest rates and such. But voters need to have a better understanding of when you see a specific dollar number in the ballot, that's not really the number that they're totally going to be on the hook for. It's actually going to be that number plus interest. And depending on the structure of the deal, like in this case, it could be much, much higher.
Wow. Yeah. So, okay, what did happen after the controversy? We did a series of stories. It really turned into a big issue. I remember a lot of TV and others followed up, but then a lot of like statewide and even international financial analysts and others just torched the district for this sort of borrowing. What happened? What was the fallout?
Yeah, so both local residents that are again ultimately on the hook for repaying that debt, as well as local public officials. The county treasurer was not thrilled about it and made that very clear. The state treasurer actually chimed in at the time and was really vocal and criticizing both the staff at Poway that put this bond in place and agreed to those terms, as well as the school board, and said that local residents should vote them out of office and they should be terminated. That largely happened, and not the staff side so much, but the multiple school board members that had signed off on that deal were voted out of office when they were back up for election in 2014. One board member had remained around, and again, the superintendent at the time remained around until he was let go a couple years later for something unrelated. But yeah, there was quite an impact again on the state level. There was that transparency law that was put into effect where districts have to tell voters their best guess on the debt costs. And also now what was formerly, these capital appreciation bonds with these outrageous sort of arrangements and 40 years and inflated maybe 10 times as high. Now school districts are limited, and it essentially reforms that were put in place now require that districts can't pay back more than 4 times the principal. So that really reined in this sort of exotic borrowing structure for school districts and really kind of put an end to that practice altogether. So the capital appreciation bonds still do exist, but there's new limits. Again, it's 4 times. They have to be what's called callable, where you can refund them and refinance essentially out of the deal if the timeline is longer than, I think it's 10 years. Poway does not have that option with this prior bond. So quite a lot, on the landscape has changed for school districts across the
Yeah,
state.
it's a little bit of a red flag when they say in the bond or whenever you borrow money and they're like, nope, you can't ever repay this early. You gotta just sit on it and deal with it. That's a little bit of a red flag. Okay, so now they are back into the market to borrow again. What are they asking for, and what will it cost?
Measure P is going to appear on the March 2020 ballot. They want voters to approve $448 million in new school bonds to fund that amount of school construction projects. They're estimating that will cost ultimately $650 million to repay over roughly 28 to 30 years. That works out to a little, less than $2 for every $1 borrowed. So that's a drastic difference, is what they're putting before voters.
Yeah, just to highlight that, just real quick. So $100 million is going to cost them $1 billion to pay back. Literally more than 4 times that is going to cost them a lot less to pay back with this new system. It just shows you how out of whack that one was before.
Yeah, and the new leadership there, again, there is a new superintendent, a new business chief, a new school board. They say, hey, we're new. We get that people were pissed about the past. They've even got on their bond fact webpage an acknowledgement that that was a bad decision, that shouldn't have happened. But we still have crumbling infrastructure. We still have new security needs that we need to address, and we don't have the money to do it. So please, give us another shot. They're actually sort of also treating this as an opportunity to rebuild trust with the community, because the 448 million that they're asking is really like a fraction of the total, $1 billion in infrastructure needs that they've had a consultant identify as necessary to keep their kids or to keep their schools in good repair. But they're like, okay, we're going to ask voters for 448 million. It'll be roughly a $33 tax increase when all those bonds are issued. And hopefully, we can do good by them and maybe come back, for more later if we can rebuild that trust.
Is that the $33 per $100,000 of assessed value of a property? Is that what that is?
Correct. Yeah, just to be clear, yeah, $33.90 per 100,000 of assessed value. So, it works out, more than that if you get a $500,000 home. What they're saying is the average homeowner in the Poway district will see something around $200 a year added as a result of this bond once all those bonds are sold. So that kind of gives you a sense of the home ownership levels there.
It seems like maybe a more healthier financing system. But you also mentioned that they might be doing things that they already promised they would try to have fixed by now.
Yeah, so definitely the issue of security has come up in this bond, like other local school bonds in recent years. Security and safety issues very much were present in the 2008 bond not too long ago. And so my question to them is, okay, well, what's different this time? They say, well, there were some schools that we didn't get to in the last bond, first of all. And second of all, even if we added, for instance, perimeter fencing at schools last time around, we're really focused now on single points of entry, given this new era of school lockdowns. And that's important to us. And so this new money will help us do things like that. It'll help us put in place an even more advanced, emergency communication system than maybe what we did last time. Surveillance cameras are in both of them. So again, maybe there's more cameras they'd like on campus compared to what their standards were previously. And they're really harping on the fact that this is a new era. We have new needs now that just didn't exist before. But there's also some very familiar, remove lead paint, remove asbestos.
Yeah.
Those are sort of your typical crumbling infrastructure, buzzwords that you see in these bonds very often.
Asbestos, that'll be in these things for 100 years from now. They'll still be saying they're going to get asbestos out. All right. Ashley McGlone, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that was it. That's the show. That's the show you love. That's the show you care about. That's the show you want every Friday. I get notes saying, it's not uploaded yet. What's happening? I need to have a beer and listen to the Voice of San Diego podcast. Where is it? Well, that's because you love it and you care about it. You should go to voiceofsandiego.org/donate and be a part of our 3,000 plus donors who make this possible. You don't want to sit there and just that guilt of just enjoying something so much and not contributing to it. Just relieve yourself of that. You don't want to live with that. It's awful. Just get it together. Don't feel that anymore. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. It is the most popular public affairs podcast recorded in this particular area of downtown San Diego. And by the way, every time one of you come up and say that to me, that line about it being the most popular political or public affairs podcast in this part of downtown, it makes me thrilled. It's a wonderful feeling. I want to shout out to Brent, who came to our member coffee. I didn't catch your last name. Brent learned about everything through the podcast and is now a fan and a member. That's the right pipeline to go through. Check out the podcast, make yourself acquainted with everything, and then become a member. Thanks, Brent. If you love the podcast, be sure to check out the Facebook group where there's some conversation. Just search for Voice of San Diego Podcast on Facebook. And check out our newsletters, too. Andy and I do the politics report each week. And Sara wraps up the entire week with her Sunday newsletter, What We've Learned This Week. Get those at voiceofsandiego.org/newsletter. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and editor-in-chief. Andrew Keatts, assistant editor. Sara Libby's managing editor. And this show is produced by Nate John, Megan Wood, and Adriana Heldes. And it is recorded in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio, which this year is made possible, sponsored by Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. Thank you, Bob Nelson. Charitable Fund. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.